Welcome to Band Tier. This is the channel where I discuss some of my favorite bands and rank their discography so you know where to start. And this is part 2 of a two-part series covering heavy metal legends, Metallica. Part 1 of this series, I covered the first 5 Metallica albums. Those are Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All, and the Black Album. This video is going to cover the most recent 5 Metallica albums. Those are Load, Reload, Saint Anger, Death Magnetic, and Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Now, a lot of what I talked about in the previous video was the 80s thrash metal sound, and in my opinion, that is the sound that Metallica did the best, and the highlight of their career was their early stuff. So this video is not going to be nearly as positive as that first Metallica video. There are some albums released in this time period that are flat out bad, but that being said, there is still some really good stuff. There's a couple really good albums that they released after the Black Album, and even the albums, with the exception of one, that aren't that great, they still have at least 1 or 2 awesome songs on them. So I'm going to focus on those. So this video might be a little bit shorter just because I enjoy talking about music I like. I don't really want to spend too much time on negatives, but yeah, this video is mostly going to be, it's going to be kind of mixed in how much I actually like the music I'm covering here. Just like always, I'm going to put these albums in a tier list as we go, so you guys can see how I think that they stack up to each other. So without further ado, let's get into what I imagine was a big shock for most Metallica fans when it came out, Load. Metallica would release 2 albums near the end of the 90s that go hand in hand with each other, Load and Reload. The first of the 2, Load, is the point where many people really started to ask questions about the path that Metallica were taking. This is a completely different sound from what we're used to with Metallica in the 1980s, and it even sounds completely different from the Black Album. Many people call this Metallica's sellout album, which I actually don't agree with, because I think if they were selling out, then they just make the Black Album again. I mean, that is one of the best-selling albums of all time. I can certainly commend a band trying to change their sound over time, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think the key to changing your sound and doing it really well is to keep your identity as a band where you change the sound, and honestly, I don't really think Metallica do that with Load. Here they almost go for a grunge sound, for lack of a better word, which, I mean, I can kind of understand why they did that. Metal in the 90s really was not on top as it was before, and many metal bands really switched things up to try and find a way to adapt. I wouldn't call Load a bad album by any means. There honestly are some gems on here, but that being said, it's not that great either. Load has 3 songs that I really love, one of which is Until It Sleeps. This is Metallica doing the more grunge style sound really, really well. It's got a really sweet guitar riff and a great chorus. King Nothing is arguably the most famous and without a doubt the heaviest song on Load. Hell, this thing still gets played pretty frequently on rock stations today, and for good reason. This is an awesome song. It feels probably the most like older Metallica out of anything on here, which is probably why I like it so much. It's got a killer chorus, and I don't know how much this one gets played live today, but I wouldn't be surprised if they play this all the time live, because, man, this is a killer stadium rock song. This is a song that I could easily see crowds of people singing along to. King That Thing is great, but my favorite song on here is Bleeding Me. This is where Metallica does the melodic style of this album wonderfully. James Hetfield is in top form here, really delivering some great vocal lines, plus this song is just catchy as hell. And I think a lot of the detractors of this album really don't see how great of a song this is. I don't see this one being brought up as like when people talk about their favorite Metallica songs, but this is one of my personal favorites. Those three songs I covered are really great, and I do love them, but as an overall album, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of Load, personally. For me, a lot of this album just doesn't, like, it's in one ear, and then it just out the other ear. It's just kind of like background noise, which Metallica really, they shouldn't be background noise. I mean, this is the band that made Master of Puppets and Justice for All, these great, amazing albums. And, I mean, there's some stuff on Load, like Poor Twisted Me, that is just flat out bad. So, overall, do I hate this album? No, I don't hate this album at all, and I mean, I know people who really, really like Load. I know a guy who thinks Load is the best Metallica album, and, well, I think that's kind of crazy, and I don't agree with that at all. I think this album does get a little too much hate, but it's still not something that I'd really recommend listening to, and if you're trying to get into Metallica, don't bother with this one until you've listened to the really, really good stuff. But at the same time, it's not offensively bad either, so, I mean, it's better than what's coming. Load is definitely a C-tier album. I don't think I can really see myself placing it anywhere else, because a D-tier album is something that is just terrible and that is just avoided at all costs. I don't think you should avoid Load at all costs, but at the same time, I really don't think this is an album that's too listenable from front to back. It's more boring than anything, and I mean, Metallica, I do see why they switched up their sound here, and it's always good when bands try to do something different. I don't like it when bands do the same thing forever and ever and ever, but sometimes sound changes work, and sometimes they don't, and I think Load is an example of where sound changes don't work. This album, though, it's not all bad by any means. I love Bleeding Me. That's an amazing song, and there's some other good ones on here. So overall, would I recommend listening to Load as an album? No, I think you can. I think it's pretty safe to skip this one if you're trying to get into Metallica. But if you do end up listening to it, don't expect too much out of it, but you probably aren't going to absolutely hate it. Like, you're not going to be like, oh my god, turn this off now. You'll just kind of be like, oh, that was it. It's pretty forgettable as an overall album. So not a huge fan of Load. Reload is the sister album to Load, and it came out a year later, and overall this album is pretty similar to Load in sound. It's less metal, it's more Metallica trying to do like an alternative grunge style. Reload's got a few good songs on it, which I am going to discuss. However, This album differs from Load in that whereas Load, the weaker stuff on it is just kind of like meh, it's kind of there. This isn't an album you can just put on and have it in the background. There is some bad stuff on Reload. And unfortunately, more of this album is bad songs than good songs. So as a result, I would say that Reload is a step down from Load, which is already an album I'm not a huge fan of. And this is a bad album, guys. You can skip this one. If you're going through Metallica's albums, not an album I'd recommend. So before I talk about the bad stuff, let me go over the handful of good songs on here. Now, Fuel, which you've probably heard, is actually a really awesome opener, and it's by far the best song on this record. This is a pretty heavily radio-played song, still gets played at Metallica concerts today, and for good reason. It's got a really high energy to it, it's got some great riffs, and that intro of James yelling, just give me fuel, give me fire, give me that which I desire, like, pretty awesome. It'll get your blood pumping for sure. The Memory Remains is another song I kind of like it, especially the first part. It's got good energy and it's catchy, but the second half of the song does get really repetitive and it's not a great song. Which, I mean, when you're talking about an album and the highlights of the album, what you can say about them is, it's not terrible. That might be a bit of a problem. Where the Wild Things Are, this is another good song. This song is legitimately good. It's not just not bad. It's got some good riffs, the vocals are great, and it has this really ambient, cool intro. And I think this is a good song, but still, Fuel is definitely the best on here, and the rest of this album is just not enjoyable to listen to. I'd sound really negative, but yeah, Reload is not a good album. I think you can skip this one if you're going through the Metallica albums. It's not the worst Metallica album, unfortunately, but still, it's just not good. Like, there are some songs on here that I do enjoy. Fuel, awesome. The Memory Remains is pretty good. Where the Wild Things Are is great. And I kind of think it would have been better if Load and Reload were one album, because there's enough good songs between the two albums that if you put them together, you can have something really, really solid. But the filler on Load and just, the bad stuff on Reload, like, I got my notes here, Attitude, Bad Seeds, songs like that are just unpleasant to listen to. And I think James' vocal performance here, I mean, he's really not at his best. So, do I recommend listening to Reload? No. You'll be pretty safe to skip this album. Definitely listen to Fuel. That's a great song. But honestly, I don't have too much to say about this because I like keeping things positive on this channel. I like talking about music I like, and the fact of the matter is Reload is just it's just not good. Yeah, I'm gonna put Reload in. I'm gonna put it in D tier. This is not a favorite of mine, as you can probably tell. Good stuff on here. Fuel's a good song, but as an overall album, nah, this thing just falls flat. I would not recommend listening to this. Maybe go back, like, if you really, really like Load, you might like this album. But that's honestly the only way that I could see someone enjoying this. And if you do enjoy Reload, leave a comment and tell me why, because I'm curious to see, because this album, like, generally isn't perceived too well, and I do agree with that. So if you're someone who likes this album, I'd be more than happy to find out why, because it would be just kind of interesting to see some different viewpoints on it. But for me, this is not an album for me. I'm not a fan of it, and yeah, definitely D tier.
My lifestyle determines my death style. My lifestyle determines my death style. Keep searching, keep on searching. This search goes on and on. Keep searching, keep on searching. This search goes on and on, friend.
Hey, I've really been liking this band Metallica that people have been telling me to listen to get into metal. I haven't heard of this album before, Saint Anger. Let's give it a shot. Can't be that bad. This band's, like, pretty great. After the duo of albums would load and reload, it would be quite a while until the next Metallica studio album would be released. They would record a great cover album called Garage Inc. and a really amazing live album called S&M, which featured the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra. Seeing Metallica play with a full orchestra is really awesome, and it's one of my personal favorite live albums. However, tough times were ahead. Unfortunately, bass player Jason Newsted would leave the band in 2001. Producer Bob Rock would play as the fill-in bassist on the next album until they got Robert Trujillo to play bass for the band full-time. In the same year, they would release Saint Anger. This is one of the most infamous metal albums of all time, and it's frequently brought up when people talk about bad metal albums. But how bad is it really? Is all the hype about how awful Saint Anger is really warranted? Yes, this is a terrible album. This is one of the worst metal albums that I think I've ever heard. Which, I mean, I love Metallica, but just because I really enjoy a band overall does not mean that I'm going to be more lenient on when they do put out something terrible. And, man, yeah, Saint Anger it's a mess. So, what makes Saint Anger so bad? Number one, and this is probably the album's worst issue, I know it gets beaten to death and everyone brings this up when they talk about Saint Anger. There's a reason. It's the snare sound. Lars has his snares super tight here and it feels like it's the only part of the drum kit that he's playing. So it's just this loud, ear-splitting sound just every couple seconds for the whole 70-minute album. It's not the only problem with Saint Anger by any means, though. And the album could have been, I'm just saying that the album could have been mediocre if it wasn't for the snare sound. It literally sounds like the drums on this album are being played on pots and pans. And by the time it's done, it's just headache-inducing. One of the best things about Metallica is the guitar playing. Kirk Hammett is a master with shredding. So there are bound to be some great solos on here, right? I mean, it's a Metallica album. Nope. In fact, there are very few, if any, guitar solos on this album at all. Yeah, you heard that right. A 70-minute Metallica album, and there isn't a single memorable guitar solo. The song structures here too, or the lack thereof, do not help. Every song feels like it's trying to go in 500 different directions at once. There's absolutely nothing wrong with varying sounds within a song. One of my favorite bands ever is Opeth, and they are masters at this. However, on Saint Anger, it just feels like a 70-minute jam session with no real hooks or memorable riffs, just loud noise and snare drums being bashed. I've listened to Saint Anger twice in my lifetime. The first time I listened to it was when I was getting into Metallica, and I was listening to all their albums, and yeah, my impression was, that is really bad, I'm never going to listen to that again. And then the second time was going back on it to just so I had fresh opinions on the albums for this video. And while I was listening to it, probably by the middle of that first song, Frantic, I was looking at my clock, counting down the time till the album will be done. That is not a good thing. You should not be listening to an album and waiting for it to be over while you're listening to it. Music should be enjoyable to listen to, not torturous. Saint Anger is just something that is torturous to listen to, and it actually gave me a headache by the time the album was done. Only music where I've had a physical reaction to it, and I think what did it was just that pots and pans snare sound. That really drills into your ears after a while. Now, I just want to make a couple things very clear. Number one, just because I don't like Saint Anger at all does not mean I like Metallica any less. I don't think it is fair to judge a band based on just one album, and if I was going to judge Metallica based on just one album, I would judge them based on Master of Puppets, which is one of my favorite albums of all time. They definitely have more bad stuff out than good stuff, and just because Saint Anger is really bad does not mean that I like Metallica any less. I still love this band. Number 2, you can like this album if you want. I'm not saying that my opinion is fact here by any means. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. I don't really understand how somebody could listen to this and think it's good, but I have met 1 or 2 people that are like, Saint Anger is not that bad. So, yeah, if you like this album, I'm curious to see why, but let me know. And you're definitely entitled to think that. There's nothing wrong with having opinions on music. Just for me, never again. I don't hope. I'm never going to listen to this album again. It's just, I listened to it a second time for this video, and I'm like, no, that's enough. Not happening again. This album is one of the worst that I've heard. I don't think I need to say much more. Saint Anger is definitely D tier. Now, this album being D tier, the other album I have in D tier right now is Reload. That album is infinitely better than this one. Is this the worst album I've ever heard? I don't know, but I mean, it's up there. This is an album you should avoid at all costs. Just save yourself. The only reason you should listen to it is like just out of morbid curiosity. But no, this album is terrible. Snare sound is number 1 reason, but it just doesn't feel musical. It literally just feels like people noodling on instruments for over an hour. It's just, it's not enjoyable to listen to at all. This is a classic example of a bad album. It would be a decent amount of time before the next Metallica album, but 2008 would bring Death Magnetic. This is seen by many as a return to form for the band, and it certainly sounds much more like Metallica than the previous 3 albums. And I'd say the heaviest album that they'd done for a while. I'd say it's heavier than the Black Album. Heavier doesn't mean better, but I would say that it is heavier. Despite this though, this one I'm not the biggest fan of. It's got some really good material on it, don't get me wrong, but it's got the same problem as Load, where most of it is just really bland. And honestly, when I'm talking about Metallica albums, this is the one I always forget about. It's not bad, it just doesn't leave much of an impression, and it just kind of exists. There are several really great songs on this one though, probably the best being the lead single, The Day That Never Comes. This one goes for that start off slower style and then pick up really quickly that some of my favorite Metallica songs have. Kirk Hammett really does a great job with his solo right out of the gate, which is refreshing after his lack of presence on the previous album. The second half is really heavy, it sounds like thrash Metallica, and it's got some wicked guitars. This is all in all a really awesome song, and it feels like Metallica again, which is really nice after especially the last 2, but really the last 3 albums. A couple other awesome songs are All Nightmare Long, which is a great zombie theme song, and Cyanide, which does the thrash sound really well, and I could honestly see this one fitting in with some of the earlier Metallica stuff. But besides those tracks, this album honestly just seems to kind of go in one ear and out the other. There's nothing memorably bad on here, which is a nice refresher after listening to the last 2, and even Load's got a couple, but besides a few great songs, there's honestly nothing too amazing either, and I would say the high points on this album are not quite as high as the high points on Load. Death Magnetic is fine. There's nothing that's terrible about this album, or even bad, really. But a lot of it is just kind of there. So I don't think that this is the great return to awesome Metallica that a lot of people will say it is. For me, this album is just kind of, for me, most forgettable Metallica album, honestly. Like, when I think of the Metallica albums, this one does not register. I often forget it exists. Even going back to make this video and listening to it again, it's just like, it's not there. It just kind of goes in one ear, out the other. Still some great stuff on here. The Day That Never Comes is a fantastic song. And there's nothing terrible. Massive step above Saint Anger. Like, this is infinitely better than Saint Anger. And it's definitely a lot better than Reload 2. I would put this album probably on the level of an album like Load. And I feel like because Load's got more bad stuff, because the high points of Load are better than the high points of this album, I'd honestly probably take Load over this one. Death Magnetic's a solid C tier. It's just kind of meh. Like, nothing great about it, nothing bad about it either. Just kind of there, which I made big improvement from Saint Anger for sure. But is this an album that I really recommend listening to? No, not really. If you want to listen to it, you will find some stuff you'll enjoy. There is good material on here. Just as a full album, this isn't one I care for all that much. Some people disagree with me. A lot of people really, really love this album. But yeah, this one's just never stuck with me. And honestly, like I said, out of all the Metallica albums, this is the one that is just, it's the least memorable to me. After Death Magnetic, it would be over 9 years until the next Metallica album, but Hardwired was eventually released in 2017. This was the first Metallica album that I followed from announcement to release. This is a return to the more thrash sound of the 80s, and it does it a lot better than Death Magnetic does. While I wouldn't call Hardwired a masterpiece or anything, it is a great album, and it's certainly the best Metallica album in a very long time. One of the most popular and famous songs from this album is the opening track, Hardwired. This is an awesome song that has that Metallica thrash sound, great riffs, and awesome drumming from Lars Ulrich. It's a killer opener to the album, and I can't get enough of it. Another song released as a single was Moth Into a Flame. This song is again another awesome one from Metallica. James Hetfield sounds great going back to his harsher tone, and I love it. The riffs on this one are all great too, and this is a song with a lot of staying power. This album also has big arena anthems such as Now That We're Dead and Halo on Fire, which fit really well into the album and they work great in a live setting. My favorite song on here is the closer, Spit Out the Bone. This is a 7-minute thrash epic that shows off the ability of all 4 band members beautifully. It just rips with great riffs, solos, amazing drumming, and a great chorus. This one would fit right in with any 80s Metallica album, and is the only Metallica song on an album that I've covered in this video that I can say it about. I cannot recommend this one enough. If you take one thing away from this album, go listen to Spit Out the Bone. And if you really like that song, then listen to the rest of this album, because it's all very solid. Hardwired isn't a perfect album, but it is a return to form to why I love Metallica so much. It's got awesome riffs, it's got great hooks, the whole album is full of songs that are just really, really fun to listen to. So is this something on the level of Master of Puppets? No, it's not. It's still a very solid album from front to back, and I'd say this is the best Metallica album in over 20 years. Best Metallica album since the Black Album. I was very impressed when it first came out, and years later, I still really enjoy this album, and I do spin it from time to time. I do like this one a lot, and yeah, I think this is a good note to go out on after kind of not being so nice to some of the earlier Metallica albums, but yeah, this is a great band, and this is an album that proves that this is a great band. Hardwired, Self-Destruct, very, very solid. 2 thumbs up. I'm going to go ahead and stick Hardwired in B tier. This definitely isn't one of the top Metallica albums, but it is leagues above the bottom stuff, and it is an album that is very, very solid pretty much all the way through. Now, I would say the second half is better than the first half. That's the half that's got Hardwired, Moth into a Flame, Halo on Fire, these great songs, but it still manages to close on a really good note with Spit Out the Bone, which is my favorite song in the album, and just one of my favorite Metallica songs, period. This is Metallica going back to their 80s thrash sound and doing it well. So if you really like the 80s Metallica albums, but you don't like the middle stuff so much, go give this one another listen, because it really is great, and it does that sound quite well. I think this is a very good album, and I'm looking forward to see what Metallica do in the future after this one. If they continue to do the path they're going on here, I think we're going to see some great music from this band. Alright, so that concludes this 2-part series covering Metallica. I'll put the final tier list up on the screen here for you guys. So, my favorite Metallica album is Master of Puppets, personally. It's one of my favorite albums of all time, and I think from front to back, it's just one of the best albums ever. It does the fast songs really well. You have songs like Battery and the title track, and then you have some slower stuff like Welcome Home Sanitarium, my personal favorite, and it just absolutely rocks. It's a heavy metal classic that everyone needs to listen to. So, if you like rock music and you want to get into Metallica, start with Master of Puppets. And Justice for All, another 10 out of 10. Phenomenal album. It's not quite as accessible as something like Master of Puppets, but the songs here are a lot more technical than any other Metallica album, and they do a really good job here with the songwriting. Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning, again, 2 classic albums. And then you have, in B tier, we go to the Black Album, which is a very, very solid album from start to finish. It is more commercial than the other Metallica albums, and it shows. It's one of the best-selling albums of all time, but it's still got a lot of great songs on it. And I think sometimes people who really like Metallica give that album a little too much hate sometimes. I really love it. I think it's great. And if you're coming from like someone who doesn't like rock or metal music at all, is just new to the genre, the Black Album is a perfect album to get someone into metal who doesn't like metal already. Because if you give them something like Master of Puppets, I think that might be like a little bit too much for someone who's starting on metal. But the Black Album is one of those albums, you know, songs like Enter Sandman and Nothing Else Matters. Those are songs anyone can enjoy. As far as albums to avoid, definitely Saint Anger. That album is just horrible. It has no redeeming factors at all. Terrible album. It is torturous to listen to. So just skip that one. Don't even bother with it. And Reload to that one, not many gems on it. It's overall just a pretty weak album. But besides those two, there's very solid stuff on all the Metallica albums. And the stuff at the top is just so good. Like, everybody needs to listen to Master of Puppets. I'm going to emphasize that once again. So, yeah, this second part of the video was a bit more negative than the first part, because the second part of the video covers the later Metallica albums, And the period I think they dipped off was the end of the 90s to the middle of the 2000s. They did pick it up again with the last album, but as you can see by this tier list, the era of Metallica that I think is the absolute best is the stuff in the 80s. I hope you guys enjoyed that video covering the studio albums from Metallica, one of the most famous metal bands in the world. I had a lot of fun making this, and if you liked what you watched, and you want to see more, subscribe, maybe hit that notification bell, and yeah, I will have another video up sometime soon. I'm going to be covering a band a bit lesser known. They're still pretty well known, but I'm going to be covering Dutch symphonic metal band Within Temptation. So I would, if you want to see that, stick around for that. If you're not familiar with Within Temptation, stay tuned because they are a band that I think they deserve a lot more credit than they get. So yeah, I'm looking forward to making that video, and I hope you guys have a good one. Peace out.